Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great. Two titans of history. Even people on the street have probably heard of these names before, even if they are not a fan of history. The reason being, Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar left an immense mark on this world. I'd like to compare these two in an opinion piece, to find out, in my opinion, who's the greatest. Alexander the Great, he was born a prince. He inherited the throne of Macedon from his father, Philip II. His father groomed him for leadership from birth. He was trained by the great philosopher Aristotle, obviously shaping his way of thinking. But when we look to Julius Caesar, he was born aristocrat, yes, but he had no political support. So he had to rise to the cursus honorum, which is the Roman political system, where you had to take certain offices to rise up in political rank. Julius Caesar had to rely on his political savviness, legal maneuvering, and his immense popular support to be able to rise to the top. And in this case, my opinion, Alexander is not as great as Caesar. Alexander was an inheritor of a kingdom, but Caesar had to climb to power, which is more difficult than inheriting. He had to fight for every inch of power he gained. But this does not discount Alexander and his political savviness. Because when he came to power, he was a young man, I believe in his early 20s. So he had much to prove to the generals and nobles under him. He had to prove that he was worthy of following. And so he did this in the way he knows best, impetuously. When the Greeks rebelled against him, he quickly put the rebellion down, burnt Thebes to the ground, and put them back under the Macedonian yoke. Alexander's political maneuvering was always aggressive, not gentle, didn't have a certain finesse to it like Caesar. And the differences between them is because of their origins. By Caesar being in a Roman Republic, he had to fight many people for different positions of power. But Alexander only had to fight the nobles under him just to prove himself. Though there were attempts at assassination, his power was more secure than Caesar's ever was, even when he was dictator. Though it may not seem, there is a connection between politics and conquering, but there is. Because when you conquer, stability is what is needed. Alexander the Great conquered a massive empire, stretching from Greece all the way to India, in a single, continuous campaign. Of course, this was very impressive, even by the standards of today. Alexander's conquest was more of a kept together, not through a political system, but a cult of personality. He was such a flamboyant and visible figure that many people could remember and rally to. But once he died, his empire dissolved, with his generals fighting over the pieces left, trying to put on the crown that Alexander left behind. But when we look at Julius Caesar and his conquests, though his conquests were definitely not of the same scale as Alexander, one thing that was different in his conquest was stability. Because once Caesar died, Gaul was still a part of Rome. Caesar was able to bring the Gauls into the Roman political system, which ensured long-term stability, long after he died. In my opinion, Alexander was the greater conqueror by virtue of size, of territory that he had taken. But Caesar, on the other hand, had a more impactful conquest, in my opinion, because he was able to secure Gaul until the fall of the Western Empire. So around 500 years or so. In order for Caesar and Alexander to conquer what they did and accomplish the goals that they had, they needed leadership skill. And they had those in spades. They were both very charismatic, but they led differently. Alexander was a hands-on general, famous for fighting on the front lines. In a speech I remember him giving, supposedly, Alexander says to his soldiers that he only has wounds on his front, on his chest, on his legs, nothing on his back, meaning he never ran from a fight. He always ran towards it. Alexander had boundless energy. That was his leadership style. If you want to compare Alexander and Caesar, you can probably describe it in one word for each. Alexander was impetuous, and Caesar was patient. Alexander could not wait to conquer, move on to the next place. He was not able to be held down for much time at all. That caused him to not care about the political systems put in place, which ultimately led to the downfall of his empire after his death. But Caesar, due to the influence of Roman politics on his personality, he had to learn patience, guile. So this caused him to be a more patient general and leader. In some accounts of Caesar, he did lead from the front, but only when it was absolutely necessary, when it was do or die. But his soldiers didn't mind. He treated them well, gave them plenty of rewards, boosts in status, and in political standing. This inspired a sense of loyalty in his troops, both of which Alexander and Julius Caesar were able to cultivate effectively. In my opinion, Alexander was the greater general, fought on the front lines to inspire loyalty in his troops, fought against the Achaemenid Persian Empire, the biggest empire at the time. Used brilliant tactics, bravery, and skill of his commanders very well, able to beat armies many times his size. But Caesar was also a capable general and strategist, but he lost a few battles, whereas Alexander, I believe, did not lose one. But that's not really how Caesar fought. He used logistics, strategy to win. For an example, when Caesar had all of Gaul under the Roman banner, at least that's what they thought, the Gauls banded together under Vercingetorix and rebelled against Caesar in Rome. To skip ahead to the end of the story, it all ends with the Battle of Alesia. Vercingetorix and his troops were inside the city. Caesar and his army surrounded them and built a wall to trap them in. But Caesar got word that Vercingetorix had called for reinforcements. Supposedly 100,000 troops were on the way, ready to crush Caesar, end their control over Gaul. Caesar could not allow this, because that would be the end of him and his ambition. So, Caesar decided to build another wall, surrounding himself this time. I don't remember exactly how big the wall was. I believe it was around 20 miles in length around him. So he basically trapped himself between an enemy in the center of a city and the enemy in the surrounding him. Caesar was able to use strategy well in this case, cutting off one troop's army from the other. But he was trapped, surrounded by those 100,000 Gauls. But he still won. There's many times where it was very close to completely collapsing. This shows Caesar's ability for patience. But when I think of Alexander, I remember when he attempted to take the city of Tyre, he asked for their surrender. But in their arrogance, they thought they were safe in their walls. And this angered Alexander greatly. He was quite arrogant and proud. He could not allow a city to not be taken by him. This siege lasted 7 months. Siege of Tyre. After the siege was completed, Alexander's rage had not been quelled by then. So he punished the city, trying to stand up to him. I hope what I've described can paint a good enough picture that Alexander, after a 7-month siege, he was so impatient to destroy a great city of Tyre. But when you look at Caesar, it took him 8 years to conquer Gaul. He had to take it piece by piece. This is due to his patient nature. He wanted to secure Gaul for a long time. This shows, in my opinion, I believe most people would agree, that Caesar was the greater statesman. He was able to create stability in Gaul for many years after his death. Unlike Alexander, which chaos reigned after his. Which approach was better, though? Alexander's impetuous nature, where he could conquer from Greece to India, or Caesar's more patience, where he's able to take Gaul, but keep it long after his death into the Roman sphere. When talking about leadership, I believe Julius Caesar was greater than Alexander. Well, more well-rounded, I should say. Alexander was a great general, king, but he didn't have the skills that Caesar did. He did have great skill, immense skill, but it was in focused areas. But Caesar was quite spread out in his knowledge. Caesar was more a jack of all trades, which I believe gave him an edge that Alexander never had. When we look to the goals and motivations of Alexander the Great, he's a glory hog. That's mostly why he went to conquer. It wasn't in my view, I don't believe it was some grand ambition of uniting Greek and Persian culture. I believe he just wanted the glory of conquest. Wanted to be like the great heroes like Achilles. But when we look at Caesar, yes, it was obviously personal ambition. I think Caesar wanted to be the greatest Roman statesman, greatest general Rome had. And I believe he achieved that. But it's also the desire for Rome to become better. Though, of course, he would benefit on the way, but so would Rome. And it was a bit of self-preservation, because Rome had a brutal political system. Because during the time of Caesar, Roman politics had started to turn violent. It was not uncommon for mobs to invade Rome, beat up politicians, even kill them. And senators, of course, engaged in similar activities. So this caused Caesar to have to fight for everything. Some goals and motivation. I believe Caesar had the greater motivation. While Alexander's ambition was fleeting, temporary, fiery, much like him, because he died of illness or poison at the age of 32. Alexander was like a supernova, great, powerful, but very fleeting. He's not around for long, but his impact has been felt for centuries after his death. But Julius Caesar, at the end of his life, was assassinated by fellow senators when he was already dictator for life. After a long, successful military and political career. But with Julius Caesar's death, the Roman Republic did not collapse completely. It did fall into civil war. But that was more of a symptom of the Republic, not entirely caused by Caesar. So, my final opinion on the comparison between Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. I believe Alexander the Great was the greatest general, the greater warrior. But Julius Caesar has him outclassed in almost every other way. In politics, he was a master. Well disciplined in many different fields. He was a poet, great orator, and in my opinion, one of the greatest qualities he's had is his statesmanship. He was able to turn a decentralized tribal area, what is all known France, and he turned it into a stable, loyal province of Rome, which is better than what Alexander could do. Because after his death, his empire collapsed. So, I believe Julius Caesar was greater than Alexander, except in conquest.